management system was extraordinarily efficient and a global leader. Okay, so if you had a bunch of software and you had 10 years invested in it at IBM, and then suddenly you're working with a new hardware system like Hewlett Packard or Honeywell or Burroughs or Digital Deck, can you move that software over? No, you could not. No, you could not. It was not interoperable. Unix was interoperable. They used to say hardware independent. And we thought, holy shit, we're going to lose our software business. And we did. And we did.
So the competition pretty much killed you with the tech.
They killed us with the tech to make the interoperable. Now,
Right.
What we've got now is that XRP is interoperable. You can have one banking system like from JP Morgan, and they communicate with a Rome bank, or communicate with a Brussels bank, or a Frankfurt, Germany bank, and it's interoperable. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Dollars to Deutschmark, no, not Deutschmark, to euros. Dollars to yen in Japan. Okay, we've got a huge advantage with XRP being a leader in the interoperability. And you know, after I heard interoperable about 20 times, I thought, sounds like Unix in the 1980s. I'm telling you, Unix was a revolution in the computer industry, and XRP is going to bring about a revolution in the banking industry from its interoperability.
Yes.
Oh.
And that, you know, to your point also, that's what's so interesting about these discussions. Like, a lot of people think we are indeed heading towards like some sort of digital chaos, but what we're actually watching is a controlled consolidation. And through these features like interoperability is an example, but ultimately this does leave XRP with only one option. It basically means it's becoming that settlement layer that will underpin not only fiat, but digital currencies, stable coins, etc., tokenized commodities, bonds, and even carbon credits now. And when people start to ask, you know, the question about market cap, and I dismiss market cap really. I don't think it's not something that, it's a really stupid one. Yes. Or even price range, you know, you have to understand, like, what are we truly looking at to handle the magnitude of all of this, right? And that's when we start having those discussions about a very high XRP price.
Let me quote, pardon me, let me quote Jake Claver. He said, I'm tired of all these market cap limitation arguments. What exactly is the market cap for email?
Yeah, it's silly.
What a great question.
Well,
what if you had to buy some tokens in order to use your email? What's the email token going to be worth? What was it worth in 1980? What would it be worth 10 years later? Another 10 years later, another 10 years later. Would it not be worth hundreds of trillions of dollars? Yes.
Yeah, but in XRP, it's a bit different. And I totally agree with that and the sentiment behind it. But when a lot of listeners, they start to look at XRP, first of all, they treat it as a token. They don't realize it's been mixed in with a lot of the nonsense out there. But in XRP, liquidity is not necessarily about how many tokens actually exist in the circulating supply. It's about how much value can actually move through the system overall in each XRP itself. And that kind of ties us into the discussion we'll get into here in a moment. But the higher the price is of XRP, the more greater its liquidity efficiency is. And that means fewer and fewer tokens are going to be required to settle larger and larger transactions. And I did write an interesting article about this on X. It's getting a lot of coverage, and I really appreciate that from the rest of the community. But I gave an example in there that if you're trying to settle, for instance, worth $1 billion of a cross-border settlement, and if you had at $1 per XRP, that transaction would require 1 billion XRP. But if you had a $10,000 XRP, just to give an example, per XRP, that means it would require just 100,000 XRP. So you're significantly having fewer and fewer tokens moving across that network because there's less slippage, there's lower volatility, there's friction. Faster finality. Exactly.
Less friction.
Very exciting.
And that's why
I'm very optimistic about this.
That's why the big players with their big usage and their big volume and their big savings are going to want a big price.
Exactly.
It's not very difficult to follow that logic. I've actually had some good arguments with people who are what I consider to be uninformed. I don't want to call them ignorant.
Not your brother again, right?
No, I haven't talked to my brother in 5 years.
Okay.
5 years. I know that's hard to believe, but
No.
I have no interest in further communication with my brother.
I'm sorry, but yeah, that kind of goes back to the pandemic. It really destroyed
Well,
lives
yeah,
and affected families.
well, if you're going to advocate Marxism in the United States and be an opponent to liberty and the republic, there's the door.
Yeah, I know people like that.
I have no interest in a conversation with them.
Yeah. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
I don't know where you want to go next.
No, actually, I mean, if you don't mind, I mean, we can always remember we can bounce back and forth, and it's for us to bounce back and forth because there are so many other pieces in this that are all tied together. I do want to talk about what has transpired since we last spoke, and I'm sorry to the audience that it took a while to do part 2, but since we spoke, gold has made a significant move, and not just in price, but in purpose, and that's what's so important for people to not miss out on. It's not just a passive store of value anymore. It's gradually being reintegrated back into the monetary architecture as collateral. And when we start to dig even deeper into this, and I want to get your take on this, Jim, I'll ask you here in a second, behind this transformation, how gold is actually being remonetized at the institutional level, and of course, how XRP is being positioned as the settlement mechanism above that overlays it all. So I know you have been analyzing this for a while in depth since we last spoke. And, I want to ask, what are you seeing really in terms of gold's role? How has it changed in the last 6 months? And of course, how is it tying into what banks are doing globally and even XRP?
I think the big shift in the mindset regarding gold is that it's no longer thought of as a barbaric metal. It's no longer thought of as in terms of what income it can produce. And I got to say, Warren Buffett, you're a big fat liar. He got called away. He got called away after selling.
Mark Cuban too. Mark Cuban. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, okay, good. They got called away after writing covered calls, and they lost their silver. Well, Warren Buffett, I don't know the full story about Mark Cuban. He's a bit of a detestable figure.
He's a liar.
What I believe has happened is that there is it's hard to call it a transformation. It's a complete shift of mindset and perception. We now are recognized as having entered a tremendous unresolvable problem of having a debt foundation. We have a debt foundation and we got a gigantic debt. And we've been told that debt is a good, solid foundation, but now the big, fat $38 trillion debt is causing the entire global financial system to stutter, to fail. For instance, big banks in the United States are not lending institutions anymore. They've lost, I think, 3/4 of that function. Unless and until, for instance, the Wall Street banks and the big bank giants in the United States realize an enormous gain with XRP, they might no longer be insolvent, then they can go back to becoming a lending institution again, instead of a predatory institution that captures commercial property because they won't roll over the mortgages. Hand over your keys. I know one case, Northern Midwest, my client's friend lost $20 million because they couldn't find a rollover of their mortgage on a big property complex. Okay, so the realization, Versan, is that gold is a really effective foundation. Foundation. We need to rebuild the foundation. We got a lot of gold out there, and some nitwits, knuckleheads think, well, gold should go way down to $100 per ounce because there's so much of them.
Yeah,
so much
silly.
Gold. And I tell them, this is my response, and I'm sassy. I'm always sassy. There are a lot of television sets in US and Canada. There are a lot of shoes. Why doesn't the price of TV sets go down to $20? There's a lot of supply. The reason is they're not for sale. There's a lot of gold. It's not for sale. It's set up and it is now promised to be the foundation. And I'm just waiting for more and more digital assets to become gold related, linked to gold in some fashion. But I don't want to go down that road. I want to focus on how there's a widespread global recognition that the king dollar has destroyed the global foundation for finance.
Very powerful statement. Very true.
And XRP is very likely that the top candidate to replace the treasury bill for global trade payments.
I agree.
Now, let's leave out the Forex reserves, because that's the other side of, it's trade payment standard and global reserves standard. But that's pretty much up in the air and a lot of dispute. And, it's integrated with stable coins. And I think, I just think it's just a time bomb before Tether has a volcano that resembles diarrhea.
I love your analogies.
I like my metaphors. I work on my metaphors in my quiet time. Let me also say, here's another one. SWIFT is the standard bearer of banking obsolescence.
Interesting. Haven't heard that one before.
7% errors. I just had an error last week, a SWIFT error. Cost me 3 days. SWIFT error, 7% SWIFT errors. Okay, those SWIFT morons, you got to get with the 20th century here. I'm sorry, 21st century, and get in gear. And I'm afraid I would really like to hear that SWIFT is relegated to memos. Okay, hey, runner. I love that. A commodity broker would say runner, and every time he did, I would laugh because I met him for lunch in Chicago. It was a very interesting meeting. Commodity traders, mostly bonds, currencies, and not a lot of other things. S&P futures, stock futures, but not cotton, not copper contracts. No, there was, what is it? The euro dollar contracts. We had lunch and I learned a bunch of different things. Runner. I want SWIFT to become the runner, and the runner for managing the Ripple XRP transfers. Okay, we're ready. We're ready, Ripple. We're ready. We got A and B all set here. No nostro vostro. I did my job with the memo because that's all I do now at SWIFT. Oh my gosh, SWIFT! If they're not careful, they pick the wrong fights, they're going to be shown the door.
I think it's already happening little by little, but a few things to tackle on what you said over there, and going back to gold too, because one thing we can look at, there are so many moving pieces to all of this, but one thing we can certainly look at is the U.S. debt. They say it's 37 trillion. I put a tweet out today. I don't agree it is 37. In fact, I think it's way over 150 trillion because you have to factor in 100. At 100. Yeah, maybe even 2, right? But you have to factor in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government expenses, the black budget, and that is something bigger. And I think over time, when with all this other frameworks being put in motion from the central banks and so forth, and all the gold buying, there's certainly another quiet story happening behind the scenes. And my point, though, is that it's going to get to a point where eventually blockchain, when we're talking about Ripple Net, it's going to expose and provide that transparency that's going to show the full picture. And I think that's a kind of moment where you could start to see gold really be at these very high valuations, like being reset, revalued, if you will, like $10,000, $20,000 an ounce. It's not fantasy. It's just math. We've spoken to people in the past who have been in the financial sector, in the gold space, specifically in Switzerland. They came up with the numbers in 2022 that gold should have been 87,000 an ounce when you factor in everything. And where am I bringing
the money supply? Factor in the
Yeah,
money.
that's one piece of it. Certainly, I agree with you. But in essence, what I think is playing out is that gold, again, being integrated back into the system. For those, listen, the analysis is not theoretical of some of the things we've talked about here. And you and I talked about this before, maybe 2 years ago. But the mechanisms are clearly being laid out through institutional adoption, institutional behavior, central bank positions, liquidity being focused around regulatory frameworks. What regulatory frameworks? We're talking about the IMF, the BIS. Now, my point, though, is that gold is going to provide stability and intrinsic value for where this is all going. And I think XRP is going to be that layer, enable settlement, transfer that can move value like gold across markets, creating a bridge for traditional and digital finance. But the trend is clear, in my opinion. I think gold is going to anchor value, and I think XRP will move it efficiently. I mean, this is what the infrastructure is telling me years before it may happen.
I think we're going to see a reval, Bursan. We're going to see a reval. Not going to be just one item. It's not going to be just one asset. How would it be if you distract from the XRP reset reval? If you have a $20,000 gold reval, you have a $150 silver reval, or $200 reval for silver, and at the same time you reval your XRP to be 1,000 or 2,000. Now that's a big jump for XRP. That'd be like, 1,000 would be 400 from what it is now.
You're basically saying, to complement it, basically if gold's price is quietly being revalued at some point to support this new system, basically to backstop the tokenized reserves and these debt instruments, it's very possible we're going to watch the early stages, but eventually get to a place where global repricing takes place. And that will actually require XRP to match that value that's flowing across.
And the gold reval and silver reval will be a distraction. People won't focus entirely on the fact that they just jumped XRP more than 100-fold. And that will be to enable its proper designed function. Yes. We cannot have a global adoption of XRP with a $50 price. It will not work. So what we might get is a segmentation coming, where there'll be some BRICS nations, there'll be Japan, Korea. I think the United States is going to be a laggard. We're going to be a laggard. We're not leading. We're not leading jack shit. We're leading in congressional disunity. We're leading in civil war. We're leading in election fraud. We're leading in border disputes where we can't even control our own borders. We're leading in cartel warfare. We're leading in bickering, partisan bickering that shuts down a stupid shit government. We're not leading in jack shit. That's why I think we're going to be following the rest of the world. And I just read an article today. It said Japan is now considering that they should follow the BRICS movements and initiatives rather than the Western, because the Westerns are so bent on war and bickering.
Well, I think they're fighting for survival, and they're just disguising it as national security. And here's another thing to your point. I actually tweeted this like a year ago, that if you look very closely at some of the things we talked about, Jim, it would seem that something is being built called ARC, where basically America, Russia, and China are going to have a coalition against the European countries. And where I'm going with this is interesting. I'm going to ask you about it, and I want your honest, unfiltered take without getting me kicked off YouTube, if that's possible. But it's very possible that if you look closely at everything, it seems that we're moving in the trajectory of the BRICS nations, but we're not calling it that. And we just keep showing American strength when really, I mean, example, 16 states in the US are now putting laws in place to make gold and silver legal tender. We are looking at silver, and we talked about this last time, where it might even become a strategic asset for our government. So if you look closely, right, yeah, that was very interesting. Exactly, right? So when you start to think about these things, and this is where I want to get your thoughts on, because this really ties this conversation together at a much deeper level. For many years, we've talked about this, but we're now talking about the restructuring of global finance. We're talking about gold reemerging as collateral. We're talking about XRP forming that digital settlement layer. But behind all of this, and this is where the other discussion comes in, there's that old story of the old guard, the entrenched financial power structures, the deep state, the banking cabal, whatever you want to call them, this architecture. These are the same entities that controlled the legacy systems, intelligence, defense, big finance. Do you think that they're going down, or are they fighting right now? And, what are your true thoughts about this ongoing battle? Because I think while we're witnessing some form of decentralization expand, we're seeing also the opposite take place, the rollout of digital IDs, the tokenization of everything, own nothing and be happy, the increasing control mechanisms that are wrapped in language and innovation. You know what I mean? So it's something I worry about quite often, and I've made it very clear I will not participate in the system if they try to force some chip into my skin or something along those lines.
I call it the banker cartel.
Sure.
And they've got a cartel business model, and it's loaded with profit, and it enables fraud. It permits fraud with impunity, insider trading. JP Morgan, duplicate serial numbers for treasuries, a certain building in South Manhattan that went down. Yeah, loaded with that kind of data. I believe 9/11, I'm sorry, that infamous day in September, 24 years ago.
Thank you.
That was a bank event. That was a banker event. I believe the banking cartel is now on notice. You adapt to the digital framework, or you're obsolete and you will not be able to compete. You will not be able even to be included and integrated. I gave an example to a client during a consult call. Imagine there are 4 big banks, maybe think of 4 Wall Street banks. And one of them says, we don't want to join the digital transformation. We don't want that architecture. We don't want that. We're going to stick with what we have. We're comfortable. We're comfortable. We know what we have. We're comfortable. And we got a nice business profit model. We're comfortable. 6 months later, they're out of business. Okay, so adapt, get integrated, or become obsolete. You're not going to be shown the door. You're going to be outside looking in. All right, so now the whole battle changes form. Verson, this is really delicate stuff.
Oh, I know.
And here's how I put it in real terms now. BlackRock and JP Morgan said, we want to be involved in the control of this. Ripple, how do we do it? Work with us. We're not going to hand you the keys of the kingdom and have Ripple with a bank license, and we all work with you. And before you know it, Stellar has a bank. Before you know it, Hedera has a bank. Before you know it, Cardano has a bank. And then all of Wall Street's working for you guys. It's not going to work that way. So BlackRock and JP Morgan asked Ripple, how do we get there? Can we become partners without killing each other, without crushing each other in competition? And that's why I think they're holding it down under 250 with XRP. And that's why I think BlackRock is looking for 3 to 5 billion coins. JP Morgan is looking for 3 to 5 billion coins. And a couple of other Wall Street banks are looking for the same, so that they can earn $100 billion and be major players for the next chapter.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and I do appreciate it, because I've thought something very similar to my brother and I have had this concern. We feel like we're witnessing this very strange convergence. You have decentralization on one hand, and you have centralization happening simultaneously. Because blockchain was really built to empower sovereign individuality, transparency, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, we do see giants like BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan tokenizing assets and inserting themselves as gatekeepers of this new digital economy. And that's
But they
almost,
can't
in my
execute.
eyes,
They can't execute the trade. They can't execute the transfer.
without XRP.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
That's the partnership.
But this is where it gets weird, though. You know, it's almost like the deep state. Two things to this. Okay, deep state realized, you know what, we can't stop this technology, so they decided to co-opt it to a degree. We can argue on that.
They're trying.
But then there's the other side. This is where stable coins come in, because stable coins change the dynamic of the conversation entirely, because they're being used now to provide a new source of liquidity that can extend these kick the can down the road cycles even further. That means institutions can manage systemic risk and maintain broader market stability, sure. But when you look at, for instance, stable coins overall, and yeah, sure, Tether, we can definitely tie this to Tether, but the proposed digital dollar, it gives the perfect example of what we're talking about here, because it allows the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve to expand the reach of the US dollar in a digital format. And this is essentially basically the deep state getting its hands into the pie. And I said this word for word long before David Sachs stood right by Donald Trump and discussed this live. It was really, it gave me goosebumps. So I think that's their mechanism to get their hands into this ecosystem, but they still need XRP.
I think the stable coin is the bridge. The key word is bridge. BlackRock and JP Morgan. Those two, if you can solve it for them, you can solve it for the rest of Wall Street. You can solve it for the big regionals.
I'm going to show you something.
BlackRock and JP Morgan need a bridge to the digital world. Go ahead.
This is it. I did a whole report on this in detail. This is one of the bridges they're using with the whole stable coins. Stronghold. This is what they're using to get a lot of the value on chain. And like you said last time, so what if they use Bitcoin? So what if they use Ethereum? Let them bring it on board. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're using this technology to do it. It's one of them. Anyways, yeah. I've researched this thoroughly and I've shared it with the audience before. And by the way, anyone investing in crypto, this is certainly a massive opportunity.
Oh, I think that's easily 100x coming.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I heard about Stronghold 2 years ago, and I've got
hopefully for me. No,
I have a client in Texas who's loaded up with Stronghold. Okay, the key is bridge from one world to the other, and you know Cardano's. Oh gosh, I can't think of his name. The Cardano's president.
Charles Hoskinson, if I'm not mistaken.
Hoskinson, something like that. Anyway, yeah. He basically raised a white flag. What he said was that, okay, reading between the lines, the interpretation of what he said was that Ripple has won. Ripple's strategy has been successful. Ripple and XRP are bridging the old traditional banking world with the new digital world. And Cardano's mistake was to be too pure, was to be too exclusive with digital and no relationships to tarnish and dirty their hands. Cardano did not want to talk to Wall Street and BlackRock.
Yeah.
Ripple did to make them partners. Ripple is going to be the bridge asset to link the giant financial firms and financial markets. And not just that, but the big financial departments for the giant corporations. Like,
yeah,
you know,
I mean,
Apple's financial department, IBM's financial department, Apple's financial department, Amazon's financial department. They're huge.
Well, yeah, XRP is becoming a global reserve asset then. We can say this. There's no argument over it anymore. It's
we're hearing the word Treasury Reserve. We're Treasury. XRP
I think in the early stages, absolutely. But later on down the road, no doubt, the XRP by intrinsic design is supposed to absorb value and consolidate value. That's how it becomes. Everybody holding an XRP token essentially is holding a stake in a system that is gradually consolidating everything around it.
In a protocol. Now, how long will it be before Google announces I'm just fast forward 18 months ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trend forecasting. Yes.
Google announces and Amazon announces they've got a $20 billion profit from their XRP held in their treasury.
Yeah. Yeah. Things just really start to get out of control
and
here.
the Amazon stock and the Google stock goes up tenfold. Okay.
And this is basically the real play, how XRP could be used as leverage later on down the road. Another discussion for another time.
And other, Silicon Valley firms, they know about the development with XRP better than most of your average Joes running around in St. Louis, Detroit, Denver, and Atlanta, and Miami. Okay, I focus on bridge. Okay, Unix was interoperable across computer architectures. XRP is interoperable across different financial systems.
Yes.
Structures and their own protocols and their own, oh gosh, what's the right word? Their own standards. Okay. When I was at Digital, we had huge arguments over whether you could use and how long will it take to take a bunch of software, a whole library of software for IBM and make it usable in digital. Unix solved that. XRP is going to solve the same thing. Interoperable.
Right. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to recognize that, it's a complementary ecosystem to a degree, but there are assets that are going to form some sort of natural hierarchy of finance. You will have like a kind of a central bank. I think Ripple is on its way to becoming that. A bank, basically a trusted custodian. Yes. And an alternative to central banking. You have retail markets, which are very important. Of course, I think XLM is fulfilling that role to a degree, and that's debatable as well. And then you have the payment rails. So each of them is interoperable. They're all built to flow and bridge to each other, and they're all compliant with the regulatory framework. So this is kind of what you're referring to, a new messaging standard that's being adopted globally by banks and central banks and individuals alike and small businesses and so forth.
Let me introduce yet another important point from my notes. It's hydraulics. You've got 100, 200, 500 major corporations in the United States, Canada, Western Europe. They all have to play ball, collaborate, and become partners with the bridge asset for doing their transfers. How many are there? XRP, XLM, Cardano, HBAR.
Strategic assets.
How many different strategic corporations are there that have the coins, the altcoins that work? Cardano. There was one more that I missed. I can't think of what it is. No, I said HBAR. But
you can count them in. I know they're in there for a fact.
XDC.
I
thought XDC was going to be a major player for stock market transactions until NASDAQ got introduced to XRP. Everywhere XRP competes, they seem to win. Okay, this is very exciting. Okay, the hydraulics. Here's the point. You got 1,000 different companies, and they're all funneling into 7.
Yeah.
There aren't 700 majors in the crypto digital world building out the infrastructure.
Yeah, it's consolidating all value.
It's